So I didn't fall in love with musical theater right away. It took me a minute to get there. And one musical that really helped me is Wicked. That was in 2003. Wicked is now one of the longest running shows on Broadway. Today on the podcast, how Wicked changed musical theater for good. I'm Elamin Abdelmahmoud. This is Commotion. How you doing? Happy Boxing Day. Listen, if you're not a musical theater person, huddle in close. I'm excited to tell you that for years and years, there's been one battle cry that is captivating people who go to the theater more than any other. You have no idea how much I'm resisting the temptation to join them and also do that. But you know what? I will spare your ears. That is a bit of defying gravity from the musical Wicked. But what you just heard is 11 of the actors who played Elphaba, the main character of Wicked, singing this iconic moment, this iconic war cry. Wicked, if you haven't heard of it, is a prequel to The Wizard of Oz. It follows Elphaba, a young woman who's born with green skin. She's trying to navigate complicated family life. She's trying to struggle to fit in at this new school. And then she develops these magical powers. Along the way, she meets a young woman named Glinda, and the lives of the two witches are changed for good. 2023 is a big year for Wicked. First of all, it's been 20 years since that musical first hit the stage. It is now Broadway's fourth longest running show of all time. Over those years, it has won a lot of awards, so many Tonys. It has won a Grammy. Not to mention, it's been seen by over 60 million people worldwide. So, to celebrate Wicked turning 20, and to make sense of why audiences find the show so thrillifying, I spoke to three Wicked experts, theater professor Stacy Wolf and Wicked podcasters Quincy Brown and Kevin Bianchi. I started out by asking Kevin, what makes a musical so timeless?
The show grows with you. I am in my 30s and I have been invested in this show for 2/3 of that time. And when I was in my teens, it was all about feeling outcast, and it was all about, being the rebel and being the black sheep. And now, as more of an adult watching it, it's about friendship and it's about loss, and it is about giving up on something you thought you wanted. And so the show itself continues to evolve and kind of morph in what its message is as you continue to enjoy it.
I love the idea that all these meanings have always been there in the work. Is just kind of like you pick up on them in different stages in your life. Anything that you guys want to add, Quincy, Stacy? Maybe Quincy, I'll go to you first.
Yeah, I think what Kevin said is spot on. I only recently have tapped into the theme of life. That I like to say it's about life, but the friendship that happens and how complicated friendships can be. And even if you want a relationship to work out, sometimes life is just going to make it in a way that it can't happen. And there's no hard feelings or anything there. That's just kind of how life shakes out is a theme that I've only recently started to pick up on. And I've been obsessed with the show for over a decade,
Stacy, what about you?
Yeah, absolutely. I love these answers and completely agree, and do think that, as Kevin said and Quincy agreed with, the growing with people is why you can love this musical when you're a kid and love it when you're an adult and see it in completely different ways. Other things that I think are important is that the songs are fantastic. The aesthetics are gorgeous. And every time you see the show, you see something different. Every time you listen to the music, you hear something different because the lyrics are so smart. The score is absolutely wonderful. And it is unusual because it's about two women and a friendship between two women that grows through the course of the show. And that's an incredibly amazing and unusual for Broadway feminist message.
I actually want to come back to that. I want to come back to that idea that, that Wicked is something unusual, that, before its time, we didn't really see this on the Broadway stages. But maybe, Stacey, you can take us back to 2003. What was Broadway like at the time that Wicked actually debuted?
Well, Broadway in 2003 was still recovering from the catastrophe of 9/11. So in the 2002 season, ticket sales increased. And in 2003, it was pretty much getting back to normal. And this show was kind of the end of the 2003 season. One of the markers of the situation in New York and Broadway at the time was that Broadway and Times Square had been completely Disneyfied, as they like to say, or gentrified. And it was a very tourist-friendly place. Beauty and the Beast and The Lion King and Aida were all playing on Broadway. So Disney had a huge presence. And in this way, Wicked is in some ways like a Disney musical. It's very accessible. The point Kevin made about it going with you through the ages of your life. That is classic Disney. So in that way, Wicked was very typical for Broadway, but it was also atypical in that it was political and sharply political, critical of politics and critical of a mob mentality. And it was about girls. It was about two women and the relationship between them. And that was completely unheard of at the time.
I want to ask you a little bit about the way that it was revolutionary, but also I guess I'm kind of curious, if you get the show that is so different from all the other shows that are around it, how do audiences receive Wicked when it debuts? How do critics receive Wicked when it debuts? What was the reaction back in 2003? That's to Stacy.
Well, I know that Kevin and Quincy know this. It was panned by critics.
Everyone in the panel was just like laughing and smiling, by the way. As I asked that question, everyone was like, oh, you have no idea. Okay, continue, Stacy. Sorry.
Well, yeah. This morning I reread some of the reviews and they were so much crueler than I had remembered them. Really mean. And I think part of it was that the show first opened in San Francisco and it got a terrible reputation and it was a mess. And I think critics were already predisposed to hate it when it came to New York. And it was described as bloated, a technicolor mess, seriously muddled, confusing. The only thing that critics liked were the actors, Idina Menzel and Kristen Chenoweth, who were universally loved and admired.
Yes.
But one of the things
and almost largely favored Kristen, I think, in the reviews over Idina.
I think they did, which we could probably take apart in terms of the role that they each played and who's the bad guy.
I wish you would go off. Absolutely. Get into it.
Well, I mean, I think that that the character of Glinda remakes this stereotypical white, elegant, boppy, popular witch
and Kristen plays her
character. And that's the role that Kristen plays. And I think she so upended our stereotype of the good witch, Glinda the Good Witch, that and she has incredible comic timing. She's so funny, and it just brought an entirely new way of seeing that character. And I think Elphaba is a more challenging role in terms of acting. Singing, it's a very difficult role, as all the Elphaba singing indicated to you. So,
well, I think it speaks to like where Broadway was at the time, too. Yeah. Where the way that Kristen sings in the show was a way that audiences at that current time period were used to hearing performers sing in Broadway shows. And I think what Idina was doing in this musical really, she started to do it in Rent, and then I think really solidified it with Wicked, changed the way that we sing on Broadway.
She brought that like rock pop sound into the quote unquote normal musicals.
Right.
Or the legit musicals.
I was reading the New York Times review, and it was like, Idina Menzel will no doubt dazzle audience members who lean towards soft rock affinities, but Chenoweth is the real deal. And it was so mind-boggling to read that point of view.
Because like era. Broadway has like a specific sort of like aesthetic and sort of, and accepts a certain kind of way of singing more than another way, I should say.
Which I would say now the aesthetic leans more towards an Idina Menzel type of singing, but at the time, Kristen and the way Kristen sang was all the rage.
Yeah, she was seen as a quote unquote legit soprano. That is such a good point.
So I want to play you guys. So the original Broadway production went on to win 3 Tonys, including a Best Actress win for Idina as Elphaba. I want to play you a bit of her acceptance speech.
Oh. Thank you. I am so proud to be in a musical that celebrates women, that celebrates their strengths and their differences, and to be in the company of these women this evening is just a dream for me. Thank you so much. And Kristen Chenoweth, you are the grace and the light on that stage every night. This is something we built together, and I love you.
I just want to describe to people listening at home that the entire panel has, you guys all have your hands clasped, maybe on the verge of
cry
tears.
when I watch that.
Totally.
And I love that. I love that. Like, this is like, again, this is the energy that we're bringing to this, but also the space that this show is able to create. Stacy, maybe I'll put this to you because you've mentioned this idea that the show is revolutionary for centering two women characters at the time of Wicked's debut. But we kind of see this a lot now. We see this a lot now in terms of like the shows that sort of occupy Broadway. Do you think we kind of owe all of that to Wicked?
I do. And another thing that I think we owe to Wicked that clip raises and that Quincy and Kevin have raised is the ability of audiences to overcome the reviews. This was one of the first shows on Broadway that was panned and no one cared. And audiences came anyway.
Yeah.
And after this moment was when audiences and fans became as powerful, if not more powerful than the critics. And critics could no longer close a show. I'm sure these guys have something to say about that.
Kevin, go ahead.
Something that we talk about on our podcast a lot is that Wicked opened, I should say, at the perfect lightning strike when internet culture was taking off, because all of a sudden we had something to talk about on the message boards, and all of a sudden people could sneak a camera into the show and record, and we could all talk about which alphabet we liked the best. And so it was really kind of just because of the nature of it being 2004, 2005, 2006. Yeah. It was kind of primed for fan culture at that point.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. We've had actresses on our podcast who say that they have a fan base because people have discovered them on the internet. They have a fan base of people who have never seen them live, but through their Wicked bootlegs are now huge fans of these Broadway performers, you know?
I want to spend a bit of time talking about the fan culture around Wicked because I think it's like unlike anything else. And so I want to return to that in just a moment. But maybe, Kevin, Quincy just mentioned this idea that you guys have talked to a lot of the actors who have played Elphaba and Glinda over the years. What is it about these two roles that end up maybe possibly defining an actor's career?
Oh, well, I mean, these are, like Stacy said, these are two big roles. These are heavy sings for both actresses. These are big, emotionally taxing acting roles. The actress playing Elphaba never leaves the stage once she's on. And I think Glinda's only off stage for maybe 10 minutes at a time. And I think for an actress, having either of these roles on your resume is a big, like, blue verification check mark. It's like, I can lead a show. Yeah. I can sing the way you need me to sing. I can exist in the corporate structure of a Broadway musical. It is a big signifier of what it means to be a leading lady in the sense of leading a company and carrying a show and being the person that the audience is going to associate as the show. Like
the skill set is a broad skill set.
Correct. Exactly that.
Quincy, you were shaking, you were nodding as Kevin was speaking there. What do you think it is about these roles that can make a career for someone?
I mean, yeah, I do wholeheartedly believe that playing these roles can really kickstart a career. Yeah. And you see it in modern day Broadway, where now it's kind of become a type of actress where you have a newer musical like Waitress or Frozen, where it's like, okay, let's just, any Elphaba we know can play Elsa in Frozen. Any Elphaba we know we can slot into the role of Jenna because it's such a stalwart in the musical theater canon now. And it's and you look at we call them the golden age Elphabas and Glindas who did the roles from when it opened to around like 2007, 2008. Yeah. And you look at all of them, and that was at the start of their career. And so many of them have turned into these Broadway leading ladies that we all know and love and gone on Legends. To have these incredible careers. And they all started in Wicked.
What is this feeling so sudden and new? I felt the moment I laid eyes on you. My pulse is rushing, my head is reeling, my face is flushing. What is this feeling? Fervid as a flame.
You guys look like a delight. My name is Elamin Abdelmahmoud, and this is Commotion. Today on the podcast, Stacy Wolf, Quincy Brown, and Kevin Bianchi are all here to talk about Wicked, the musical, and its 20th anniversary. They're all dancing. They're all dancing as I'm looking at them right now. We just heard a bit of What Is This Feeling, Elphaba and Glinda's first duet in the show. Stacey, you've written about how the show plays on a lot of queer conventions. Many fans point out this song as being one example of that. Could you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, sure. Well, one of the reasons that I think Wicked is popular, no pun intended, in addition to it being revolutionary, is that it's actually built on a very old-fashioned musical theater structure. It's pretty much a Rodgers and Hammerstein musical with two women. And if you trace the organization of the songs that tell their story, and most of the songs in the show are duets, which is very unusual. There are a lot of solos, there are a lot of ensemble numbers, but the majority of the show is duets with these two women singing together so beautifully. And what we were each dancing in our seats, but we were not singing, which I know we all wanted to be doing along with that, with that recording. But Loathing is such a great example. And I think Loathing also demonstrates how self-conscious Stephen Schwartz and Winnie Holtzman were when they were writing this show, that they know their musical theater history backwards and forwards, because this show is a quintessential subjunctive love song, like what we call in musical theater scholarship. So it's the first duet in a show where the characters hate each other or don't get along or don't like each other. But because they sing together, the audience knows they're going to get together in the end. And that's exactly what happens in this show, in this song. And this song is so smart about it because it plays on all of that, because it sounds like they're going to say, I'm in love with you. And then they say,
face flushing in my head.
Exactly. All of the things that signify love, but then they loathe each other. And then as the musical goes on, all of the songs map their relationship in a pretty old-fashioned Rodgers and Hammerstein way, where they come together, they come apart, they each express their desires, they get along, they don't get along. And then at the end, they sing Changed for Good, which is their love duet, where they express their love for one another. And even though in the story, Elphaba leaves and Glinda stays, in our emotional connection to this show, those women are together and those women are a couple.
Kevin, is that how you read it too?
That is how I read it. And I feel like, whether you view it as platonic or romantic, this is a show about the relationship between these two women. But then I think the other part of it being a very queer show is this, it just has this built-in fan base we always talk about with queer people, and especially with gay men, is we are trained from an early age to identify with the villain in things, because it's always, the villain's always a fop, or the villain is always a butch woman.
Yeah. And the villain tends to be queer coded in a way. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah,
and so then
the diva.
Diva, right? To then have this musical handed to you where it's like, here's the celebration of the villain. And, all these little gay kids being like, oh, well, what is this gift or this curse that I have inside me? And maybe someday that will be celebrated. But for now, it's like people are just targeting this thing about me against myself. And so it does speak, again, kind of subconsciously or beneath the surface to the queer experience, in addition to these kind of subtle queer love story that Stacey's talking about.
Well, yeah, I was going to say, in some ways, we're talking about Wicked as this show that has helped to reimagine what we see on stage. But a lot of fans, a lot of critics have pointed out that the show is not perfect in that way. Stacey, how does Wicked compare to other Broadway shows when it comes to the representation of who we actually see on stage?
Well, I think, as we've said over and over, the fact that two women are the stars of the show cannot be overpraised. It's so unusual for two women to carry it the way they do, and the way Kevin and Quincy talked about it being so important in an actor's career to be able to play one of these roles. So that alone was, and still is revolutionary. I think as soon as they started casting actors who were not white or very thin as one of the leads, that was revolutionary. It took a surprisingly long time for that to happen.
Right? Yeah.
Quite recent for the first Black Glinda. And to my mind, really surprising. And I really am curious to hear what Quincy and Kevin have to say about it. And then the other unfortunate representation that I know these guys know about is the negative characterization of Nessa Rose, and the idea that one of the most evil characters in the show has a disability and is confined to a wheelchair. And that's such an old, outmoded trope of disability being represented by an evil character. And I think that I'm sure that it was unintentional on the part of the creators, because the show really goes overboard to portray a liberal, progressive message. It tries very hard to give everyone a fair shot. And I think probably if Wicked was opening now in 2023, the creators and the creative team would be more attentive to that stereotype, because fortunately in recent years, all of us able-bodied folk are much more attentive to representations of people with disabilities on stage. So I think I wouldn't cancel Wicked or hate Wicked. I just feel like it's something that we need to talk about as we talk about all of the dynamics of representation and their political realities.
Quincy, how do you read this? Yeah.
I think it's exactly right. I think it's actually indicative of just where the Broadway industry was at the time Wicked opened. Wicked opened 20 years ago. Sure. And 20 years ago, if you're going to have a Black person in the show, it's because they are portraying a Black person and it's a Black show. I remember there was an actress who played Elphaba in, I think, like 2000, early on in the run. And the online chatter was that she was a big Elphaba, a fat Elphaba, a thick Elphaba. And you look back now and this actress was not at all, you know? So even the fact that that was the conversation happening at that time, I think shows maybe why the show has been so slow to change.
Sure.
And now, to Stacey's point, now that society is at a point where we are pushing for these things, I think Wicked is actually one of the long running shows who is actively trying to address that and address it quickly. If you look at the West End cast right now, all three principals are Black, which I think is incredible.
Yeah.
But that's not to say that, like, yeah, it is a little insane to me that we haven't had a full-time Black Elphaba on Broadway, especially when, you know, so many Black people key into Elphaba. And it's like, this is a Black character. Like, this is an allegory for someone being Black. Her skin is green and she gets made fun for her skin color. Yet we have these white actresses playing her over and over and over again, you know? And I think it brings a lot to the show, like having a Black woman play the character, because they can key into Elphaba and the experience of being Elphaba in a way that a white actress just can't, you know?
Kevin, it looks like you were going to say something.
Well, I would just add to kind of touching back to the character of Nessa Rose, another representation or diversity issue there is that there has never been an actress who uses a wheelchair play that role. Because speaking for the Gershwin Theater specifically on Broadway, that backstage is not ADA accessible.
It's not accessible,
And then there is blocking in the show that requires that actress to be on her feet. And it's like, well, there are ambulatory wheelchair users who could do that. And something about the movie that's coming up that I think is really exciting is that it's the first time that a wheelchair user is playing the role of Nessa Rose. And I think that, and the fact that Cynthia Erivo, a queer Black woman, is playing Elphaba in the movie, I think is really, I hope, it is going to signal a change in the way that we're seeing these characters cast on Broadway as well.
I think I think by having the movie Elphaba be Black and the movie Nessa Rose be an actual wheelchair user, that is no doubt going to influence how the stage productions get cast, because these movies are going to become how the mainstream culture sees Wicked, you know?
And I should also say
the Chicago revival and the movie, it's very different than the original, but that is now the image that people expect of that property.
I have to say, Quincy, the point that you made about the idea that like the show is actually responding relatively quickly to how society has changed is worth noting, because it's one thing to sort of erect a show during a period of time when our norms were different, but now that they've kind of changed, it's not like every show on Broadway is suddenly much more diverse and doing better at this, but Wicked is you know, more meaningfully pursuing that. Okay, we can't talk about Wicked without hearing a little bit of this song.
You will be popular. You're gonna be popular. I'll teach you the proper poise when you talk to boys. Little ways to flirt and glance. Ooh, I'll show you what shoes to wear.
That is Popular from Wicked. It's one of the most popular songs from one of the most popular musicals of the 21st century. Listen, I think it's really important to actually talk about the fact that all the time we talk about how there's no new ideas anymore. But this is a show that has existed for 20 years and people are still interested in it. They're interested in it even though it's based on existing IP because it's based on a book that is based on a movie. It's kind of has had this very circuitous route and people can't get enough of the show. Maybe I'll put this to Quincy. Quincy, it did help us understand a new era of Broadway fandom. Could you tell us about how fans relate to the show online, the way that they talk about it? Because earlier someone mentioned bootleg recordings of earlier Elphabas. And I'm like, oh my God, that's how people talk about, like, I don't know, like the Grateful Dead from 1975. Like, what? So tell me about like the fan culture. Of Wicked.
I mean, I'll tell you my own story.
Let's
I
go.
grew up in Hawaii, where obviously I didn't have access to live theater in the way that I do now living in New York. So I discovered Wicked through Broadway bootlegs on YouTube. And what that did was I was able to compare and contrast, like, oh, Eden Espinosa performs Defying Gravity this way. Stephanie J. Block sings it this way. And you build up your Rolodex of all of these actresses and how they perform the character. Yeah. I had Wicked memorized as a musical before I ever saw it live. The first time I saw it live, when the tour finally came to Hawaii, I knew every single word. I knew every actress who had ever played it. I was the biggest fan, only because of bootlegs.
Yeah.
And there's a whole culture behind it. So I had a website where you can collect these files. They have masters who go in and record the actual thing and then release it online to people. And then you trade with other bootleggers. Like, oh, I'll give you Eden Espinosa in LA in 2008 if you can give me Stephanie J. Block on Broadway in 2006. And you just build up this huge, I have hard drives and hard drives of just Wicked bootlegs that kind of sustained me and my love for theater while I was not in New York City and able to have actual access to it.
The way that you're talking about it, like it's your like lifeblood, is giving me life. I love it. Okay, before we go, I got one more question to ask you, and it's about the movie. For the longest time, it's been like, this movie, is it happening? Is not happening? It's been in the oven for 20 years. That is a long time to be baking a movie, but allegedly it's arriving. Allegedly, Ariana Grande and Cynthia are cooking. Kevin, what can we expect from the movie when it finally arrives, presumably sometime this decade?
Yes. Yeah, I know. As soon as the actor strike happened, I was like, oh my God, please don't delay Wicked again. Please don't delay the Wicked movie again. I think what we can expect to see is much like in the vein of Adina and Kristen, I think Cynthia Erivo and Ariana Grande are both women who were put on this earth to sing. They have two of the most powerful voices out there. And I think that is key to casting these two roles in a movie that is going to become such a definitive version in people's minds. Yeah. And so I'm really looking forward to, we know Cynthia's going to act the HE double hockey sticks out of it, and we know Ariana
you can say hell, that's that. Totally fine. Yes.
And we know Ariana can do that, frothy pop princess kind of thing.
Yes.
And so I think really them having these incredible voices is just going to be a powerhouse of a movie.
And we talk all the time about how Ariana Grande is our modern day Glinda. Like, she really is like a 2023 Glinda in real life. So I really do think it's perfect casting, and I think she's going to surprise a lot of people.
Me too.
There's been a lot of chatter going around, but I think watching how she has very intentionally distanced herself from her pop star identity during this Wicked era, to me signals how seriously she is taking this role, and she knows the pressure that is on her. And I'm very excited to see it.
Stacey, last word to you. What are you expecting from the movie?
I'm really excited and curious to see the dynamic between them, because I think that film is so different than theater. And when you're in the theater and seeing the actors as Glinda and Elphaba, you can feel the chemistry between them in virtually every production I've seen. And I can't wait to see how that comes across on film.
Oh my gosh. I'm excited for this movie. I'm excited that you all were here. Kevin, Quincy, Stacy, thank you so much for your time. This has been a delight of my day. Thank you. This is the best. Thank you so much. Of course.
Thank you.
Stacy Wolf is a professor at Princeton University and the author of Change for Good, A Feminist History of the Broadway Musical. She was in New Jersey. Quincy Brown and Kevin Bianchi are co-hosts of Sentimental Men, a Wicked podcast. They were in New York City. Wicked the Musical turns 20 this year, and it returns to the stage in Toronto next summer. I'm going to see you there. And that is it for the podcast today. Remember, you can listen to the show anytime you like, wherever you get your podcasts. And also, if you've got a moment, check us out on Instagram. We are at Commotion CBC. My name is Elamin Abdelmahmoud. Hey, I hope you're enjoying your holiday. I'll see you tomorrow.